Morning, everybody. Morning, everybody. There we go. The pulse is going. There we go. Good to see you. Happy Monday. Happy Writers Week 32. 32 years. 32. Before we start, we do need to thank someone that has gone unthanked so far. We need to thank the tech crew for setting this all up, giving us all this amazing stuff. So thank you. Turn down the aisle, look at your teacher, say hello, say thanks for bringing us, say you're the best. Heart hands, high fives, hellos. Also, if your parents are part of the Booster Club, make sure you thank them because this allows us to have fantastic authors like we see in front of us right now. I was saying this to first hour. How many of you were here last hour? Was anybody here last hour? Okay. So I was telling our panel today that I'm going to try and ask different questions, so it's a little bit different of an experience. There are some ones that I definitely want to ask again, but hopefully we get some new ideas, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that this hour is has a little bit more variety so that you're not hearing the same thing twice. So. Mr. Anderson came up to me a couple weeks ago and he said, hey, we're going to have a horror writing panel. And I said, oh, sweet. And I have horror movies on my laptop right now. So he knew his clientele. And I said, that's great. And he goes, do you want to host it? I was like, oh, okay, maybe. So, but I'm really excited I get to talk to these great authors. So I do want to introduce them before we get started. I messed this up last hour, so I don't want to forget this. If you are interested in buying books from these three authors, which you should because they're really good, they are not going to be up here as in years past. They're going to be out in the hallway. So if you are interested in buying a book, they are out in the hallway. Make sure you go and buy them. All right, so we're going to start to my immediate right. This is Nick Medina. He is a Chicago-born horror writer and a member of the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana. His debut novel, Sisters of the Lost Nation, was selected as a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection, and his work is known for blending supernatural tension with local and Native American folklore. He's also the author of Indian Burial Ground and The Whistler, which is his third novel. Please welcome Nick Medina. And to his right is Cynthia Pelayo. She is an award-winning author whose horror and dark fiction often braid together folklore, grief, and mystery. She won the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a Poetry Collection for Crime Scene. Her novel, Children of Chicago, was a Bram Stoker Award nominee. Superior Achievement in a Novel, and also won the International Latino Book Awards Gold Medal for Best Novel in the Mystery category. She's also written The Shoemaker's Magician and other Chicago-centered fairy tale-inflected works. Please welcome Cynthia Pelayo. And last but not least, we have Jimmy Giuliano. He is a writer and a high school educator at Lake Forest High School, and his horror blends eerie nostalgia with page-turning suspense. Several of his short stories have gone viral on Reddit's No Sleep, and his debut novel, Dead 11, is in development at A&E Studios, and he is the author of 13 Months Haunted, which is right here. Please welcome Jimmy Giuliano. All right. How'd second hour or third hour go? Go well for you guys?
Yeah, that was great.
Not too bad. Not too bad. The question that I wanted to start off with, and this is the same question that I mentioned earlier. Everybody has, well, first off, where are my scary movie fans? Where are my horror fans, spooky stories? There we go. All right, so we got some fans in here. And so even if you're not a scary story fan, okay, or you don't like horror movies or anything, the one thing that I love about horror movies and horror literature is that everybody has been scared. It's a universal thing. There's things that literally scare you. There are things that emotionally or mentally scare you, bumps in the night, things like that. And I asked this last hour, and I was hoping they could talk again about it, but what was that first moment in literature or in film where you were absolutely terrified. The one thing where you're like, oh, that's new, and that is scary to me.
Yeah, for me, it's always, I think it's working. Yeah, we're working now. For me, it's always the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series. If you've ever flipped through those books or even just looked at the cover, you know those illustrations are absolutely terrifying. So when I was a kid, we had those, and they were in a closet. And whenever I'd go digging through there, and if I'd come across those books by accident, I couldn't even look at them. I'd have to throw them to the side. But when it comes to reading, the first thing that really scared me was Salem's Lot. There's a scene in there, a famous scene where the dead kid pops up outside the window, and I remember just throwing the book beside me on the bed, and I couldn't finish it for a while. I don't even know how long it was until I picked that book up again. But yeah, those were my two major introductions to horror.
I unsettled the group last time with this response, but I'm older. I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, and so the first horror movie I saw was around 85 or 86, and it's when A Nightmare on Elm Street came out on VHS, and we had the big wooden floor television and a big VCR, and I walked in when Freddy Krueger extended his arms across this alley scene, and my brother was babysitting me, and he told me, it's okay, you can stay here. The scary thing on the television can't hurt you. And from that moment, I just became completely transfixed. And my dad supported my love of horror, so we would stay up late watching all the Tales from the Dark Side, all the Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Yeah, those are so good. And he got me like my video rental card, and he got a television for me. And I guess he knew I was watching horror, but they didn't know the extent of the horror that I was watching. So like by 9, I was watching Hellraiser. I was renting like Faces of Death by like 12 and watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre by 12. So I was completely like desensitized. But it wasn't until I read The Exorcist around 30 that I can't even remember the scene, but I just remember I had to put the book away for like a week, and I returned to it later.
Yeah, I'm like also incredibly desensitized now. I just can't really get scared by anything in like a book or a movie. You know, growing up, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was like legit. That was like the book of like our elementary school library. That was like, yo, like you gotta check this book out. It is so scary. And I remember being, like Nick said, very creeped out by the photos. Excuse me, not the photos, by the illustrations. My first nightmare was actually from the Wizard of Oz. So like the OG Wizard of Oz with like the Wicked Witch of the West. Like I remember that being my very first nightmare, probably being like 5 or 6. And I also grew up on like a steady diet of horror movies like Halloween, Alien, Fright Night, stuff like that. And I also had a Ouija board. When I was a kid, I had a very unsettling experience using a Ouija board, so much so that like I threw it out. Like something weird happened, and I couldn't have it be like in the room with me anymore. So I remember just throwing it out, putting it out to the curb. So that was also unsettling for me as well.
Did you see Paranormal Activity when the Ouija board moves in the living room?
Yeah, I took my buddy John, who's like this like real tough rugby guy, and we saw this in the theater. The first Paranormal Activity, which was probably 20 years ago at this point, and he was just gripping my arm, and this is like a guy who would like destroy people on the rugby field, and he was gripping my arm, just being like, I can't believe that you're making me watch this. Like it really freaked him out.
These are such cooler examples than mine. The first time I was ever scared, well, Tales from the Crypt Keeper that always freaked me out. But like my first nightmare was, do you remember the Brave Little Toaster? You remember that animated movie? There's a nightmare scene where there's a clown that like terrorizes the toaster, and that was my first nightmare. So confessions from me today. Anyway, let's talk about cooler things. I do want to start off a little bit with, and I didn't ask this last hour, and I want to talk about first lines of books. And so I just briefly want to say what the first lines are to these, not to Cynthia's book here, but to Vanishing Daughters. So Nick, your first line in Sisters of the Lost Nation is, "Do you hear that?" her uncle whispered. Cynthia's is, there's a journal entry, and it says, "Keys and gates and locks and thorns, I say, but what's my name?" And then for Jimmy, Yours is Piper Lowry Palmer was the most notorious member of the family, although Anders had scarcely heard of her before the wedding. So I was just wondering, or walk us through why those are the lines that you decided to start your story. Was there anything about it that kind of piqued your interest?
Oh, geez, I wrote that one so long ago, I can't remember how that ended up. Actually, that chapter wasn't. So the first chapter of Sisters of the Lost Nation actually was added on almost at the end of the editing process. So I had originally started with something else, and then my editor had said, I think you should add a chapter here that gives us a little bit of background. So that sentence you wrote is part of a prologue which takes place 10 years before the bulk of the story. So yeah, I think I was just going into the mindset of what happened 10 years ago to this little girl that infused her with fear, basically, because throughout the story she is kind of haunted by this traditional ghost story that's told on her reservation. And so that opening chapter, that opening line sets up that ghost story that she heard.
And that opening line essentially tells you what the entire novel is about, because it's a pretty, Vanishing Daughters is a really disorienting novel because the main character is grieving, but that tells her and the reader you're in a fairy tale. And so I thought of fairy tale devices, keys, gates, locks, thorns, and the fairy tale it deals with is Sleeping Beauty. And what's my name? Briar Rose. We learn later.
Yeah, I guess like a lot of like what I write is very like matter of fact. Like I approach horror and like mystery, and the characters are oftentimes just walking into situations that they don't know like what is about to happen. So I started 13 Months Haunted, you know, very quietly, but just to let people know, hey, there's this person, Piper, like she has some notoriety to her, but like we don't know, and Anders, one of the main characters, has no idea who she is either. So just kind of start the mystery right out of the gate.
Also, I wanted to, I didn't ask this last hour either, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the idea of the supernatural. I grew up, and still I don't believe in ghosts, but I had family members that would tell me about relatives that had seen them. You know, so I couldn't disprove it, you know, but my family had history of seeing them in their house in Connecticut and things like that. Did you have similar backgrounds with the supernatural, or was this something new to you in your writing?
Well, I come from a family that owns a funeral home since the 1950s, and you know, it's an old. So the funeral home is in an old Chicago building. So the funeral home is on the first floor, and then there are apartments above it. And my mom and her siblings grew up on the second floor. And then, you know, when my mom got older, she got an apartment on the third floor, and that's where my sister was raised. I never lived there myself, but my whole life I've heard ghost stories from, you know, my parents, my aunts, my uncles. Even my sister has stories about, you know, living in that building. And so I think from a very young age I became very interested and very, you know, just kind of fascinated by what else might be out there, or what else might be going on that we don't really know. But yeah, like you, I don't have any good stories myself. I grew up loving the show The X-Files, and you know, the slogan, I want to believe. I actually have that poster over my desk in my office. You know, I so badly want to have those same experiences and have those ghost stories myself, but I'm not quite there yet.
So there was an exorcism in my house. Growing up, superstition and ghost stories was just part of the culture. There were things that you were not supposed to talk about. You were not supposed to talk about, like ghosts, for example, even though there were so many ghost stories. And so what used to happen, my parents owned the building, and upstairs my grandfather and my aunt used to live. And I remember there used to be the sound of people running back and forth and doors opening and closing. And I remember really specifically telling my dad, like, there's no one up there. And his exact words is, we don't talk about those things. You're not supposed to talk about those things, because to talk about those things gives it power. And like a few weeks later, like there was like this prayer thing that was done in the living room, and it was like an exorcism in the house. So
I've never, as much as I wish that I've seen a ghost, I have not seen a ghost. But I've definitely like have friends that I trust and people have told me enough, you know, experiences that they've had, and I'm a very sympathetic, empathetic person, and I have no reason to doubt them. And you know, like some of the stuff finds its way into my book, into my books. In Dead 11, there's a creepy part where someone says, "Run to your mother," like run to your mother. This comes from my buddy's ex-girlfriend. She was down in like her basement getting something. It was dark, and then she felt like a presence behind her, and she was alone, and something whispered into her ear, "Run to your mother." And she told the story, and like she was not lying. Like something happened to her. She heard something, whether it was real or imagined is up for debate. But I'm like, that's really good. As I'm like typing it into my notes app on my iPhone, I'm like, this is going into a book. But then I had my weird Ouija board experience too, and that's a whole other story. But it definitely freaked me out, and that's the one experience that I've had where I'm like, okay, like maybe there's something going on.
Our family's was the woman in the green dress. That was the Connecticut house. It was, they would just ignore it. They would just see her walking through the halls, and it was just like hey, and that was it. You didn't talk about it. So I just wanted to see where you were coming from on that one. Last hour, Nick, you were talking about, I think it was Nick, was talking about how horror allows you to kind of face those fears or those problems that you may have as a reader. And I was hoping you could kind of rehash that, but also, talk a little bit more about that.
In life, obviously, we all have things that scare us, things that unnerve us, and we all have our own individual horrors. And sometimes it's really hard to deal with those things. It can be hard to cope with those things. But I think through horror, you find different ways of approaching the things in your life that cause you unease and cause you distress, and that's why I like writing horror, because I'm able to address the things that are bothering me, things that I can't quite find the solution for. And through the process of writing, even though this is all fiction and we go off into crazy areas sometimes with this fiction, I do end up finding something that brings me some sort of peace. Like for instance, with my book, The Whistler, it largely revolves around the themes of loss of autonomy. The main character becomes paralyzed, and his whole life obviously changes because of that. And think about that, having a fully functioning mind, but you're no longer able to use your body the way you once were. And, that's something that terrified me. And so through the process of writing this book, interviewing people who've actually lived that experience of losing their own autonomy, losing their body autonomy, and seeing how they overcome those things, it gave me some of the answers I was searching for. How can you actually cope with this? How can you see the light at the end of the tunnel and still be, still kind of be the person that you were while having had such a drastic change in your life? So yeah, I think horror is a great way to find solutions and actually find comfort. It might sound odd, but you find things that will make you feel just a little bit better about all of those terrifying things in your life.
I was on a panel last week, and after the panel, one of the professors that was on the panel with me, he approached me, and he was like, "I watch a lot of horror movies. Do you think there's something wrong with me?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." And he's like, "It just helps me with everything that's going on." I was like, "That's part of why so many people are coming to horror and coming to horror films, because it's just a very healthy way to process fear and anxiety." And goodness knows there's more than enough anxieties that we all are facing regardless of the age. And so there is just something cathartic to sit there and watch someone go through these things and maybe, hopefully, make it out to the end.
Yeah, I like horror that always has hope at the end. So, you go through this whole process, you're being terrified, you see all this horrible stuff, but at the end you see that there is the light, you still have the hope. And that's the whole point, I think. You see that you can survive, you can get through this.
I mean, I didn't realize until I was writing my stuff, that I was writing about my fears. Like I didn't sit down and be like, all right, let's write about my fears today. But you know, in Dead 11, it's about grief, and like the themes of the book are like what happens if you lose a child. And you know, like I have an 8-year-old daughter, and that'd be the worst thing that I could ever imagine happening in my life. And you know, like that type of themes, those themes bring its way into that book. In 13 Months Haunted, it's about one of the main themes is parenting, and how far would you go to protect your child? And it's like, oh, like these are things that I live with every single day, and they're just finding their ways into my books.
Well, I want to say quickly, like, just to add to that, like, Vanishing Daughters, I had turned in a book. My dad was dying, and we were super close to him. And the day the book was due to my editor, he died. And so I was, like, not in the right headspace. And I got an extension for that book, and I finished it in 2 weeks. And then I was on contract for another book, and that was Vanishing Daughters. So I was writing this book, like, completely grieving, and that was my way of processing that.
Kind of going to that idea of the world of publishing, I did want to ask, because I know, Nick, you said that you're trying to do a book a year, right? And I was wondering, what is that like, feeling that external pressure from contracts, from publishers? How do you find the momentum to keep writing, even when the inspiration might not be there? Are you of the mind that it's whatever you write, you just gotta force yourself to do it, or do you wait for that inspiration to strike?
For me, I have to be excited about it and passionate about it to actually want to write it. I never force it, and really for me, it's not even an issue. You know, this is something that I've wanted to do forever. Since I was a little kid, I knew that I wanted to write, and I dreamt about it forever. And I tried for 15 years to get a book deal, and it's not an easy road. But the motivation for me was never an issue. I was always writing whether anyone was reading it or not. You know, I have a hard drive full of stories and novels. I think I have 16 manuscripts that I wrote before my first book got published, and no one has read any of those things, but it didn't matter because there was worth in it for me. There was value in it for me, and it's just something that I've always done, something I've always enjoyed doing. But now that I do have a book deal and I work with a big publisher, there are stressors from that. Like, are my ideas good enough? Will these ideas sell? Will people want to read them? So now suddenly you're looking at it from a different point of view, whereas before I would just write what I wanted to write and just let it come out. And now I do think a little bit more about, is this something that's trending right now? Is this something that people might be interested in? So there is a little bit more pressure there, but like I said, at the same time, I still always write whatever is getting me excited. So I think about it like, you get an idea initially, and it could just be a very, very small idea, maybe just one sentence that makes you a little bit uneasy. And then I think of that as like the spark. And will that spark turn into a flame? So will other ideas connect to it? And will it just keep growing and growing and growing? And when that happens, that's when I know, yeah, this is what I need to write.
Yeah, in college, I was the person, if I had a paper due at 8:30 in the morning, I would start it at midnight, and I'd finish at like 6. So deadlines help me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, obviously you can't save a whole book for like a few weeks or even like a month, but the deadlines really help me write faster, even if I'm not in the zone, because like at some point it is a job. As much as you want to just think it's all like rainbows and puppies and those magical writing moments of like sitting next to a lake on a dock. But like most of the times writing is very lonely and dark and cold, and you're sitting alone wondering, is my editor going to like this? Are the readers going to care? Does anyone want to read a supernatural baseball thriller, which is my third book? So we'll kind of, there's a lot of pressures, but then when I find myself in the zone, though, I'm like, this is why I do it. This is fun. I find this incredibly satisfying.
I mean, agreed. It's just a lot. It's a lot. And I do this full time now, and I think there's like these idyllic images of the writer. You're right on the lake house, and it's like, no, my office is like there's paper everywhere. There's like empty coffee cups everywhere. And my husband's like, have you eaten today? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just, like on deadline. And so it's sometimes it's really frantic.
I was taking a look, and Cynthia and Nick, you were both, correct me if I'm wrong, you were both on the preliminary lists in 2024 for the Bram Stoker Award for Vanishing Daughters and Indian Burial Ground. I think I got that correct?
Yeah.
Now, I looked at the list of the other names on there, you know, like Josh Mollerman, Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, you know, big names. You were talking, Jimmy, about like sitting in a dark space, lonely, writing, you know. As writers, what's it like to see that external validation from other writers or other people in your genre or your craft? Does that kind of spur you to keep going? Are you not focused about the validation? What do you think?
I try not to think about it because I feel like if I think about it, I'll kind of like lose my footing and then I kind of fixate on it. And I almost feel like my writing career has just like been me with my head down, writing frantically and throwing things at my agent. And then every now and again, I like peek up and I'm like, I've been nominated for something. And I just kind of keep on because I don't want the validation to ever come external. I think for me personally, I have to have the value internally. Otherwise, it's not going to mean anything. The words have to mean something to me and that's like my biggest fear is that what other people think would manipulate what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, good or bad. You know, I think like I always appreciate the validation. I'm very incredibly grateful when anyone like blurbs my books or tells me that they like something, but then there's that part that messes with your head of like, oh, I guess I need to do it like this again.
Yeah.
So like the good and bad stuff, or you just kind of keep your head down and just kind of write what you think works for the story, especially.
I feel like I have kind of mixed feelings about it. Cause kind of like what Cynthia said, you know, you don't want the validation to just come from, being nominated for something. But at the same time, going back to what Jimmy said, when you're sitting alone in a room and, my life, I used to teach. And then now that I'm a full-time writer, life has become very solitary. I don't have those interactions anymore. I don't really have coworkers.
I'm going to send my kids to your house.
Yeah, right.
They can tell you you're great.
It's just me sitting in my office most of the time, and it is dark and cold, like Jimmy said. And so then when you do get those moments of validation or someone, saying something about your book or getting nominated for something, it does at least let me know that, okay, what I'm doing isn't a complete waste. Or like people are appreciating it, and because it can be really hard to kind of see that other side when you're just always alone and just always in front of a computer and just working. So it is appreciated, but I guess it's not always necessary.
But I know what you mean. Like, it's nice to kind of gauge, like, did this thing connect with somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any
That
value
helps.
here? Are people appreciating it at all?
Yeah.
I did want to ask this last hour, but I didn't, so now's the time. Has there ever been a time where you wrote something that you were kind of shocked or surprised at the content of it? Did you ever write something that an editor or a publisher was like, no, that's not a topic we want to cover? Or were they just all for whatever you came up with?
Oh, that happens to me a lot. I get told to like scale back. They're like, you can't write this. Well, and it depends with what kind of publisher you're with, right? Because every publisher or every imprint has a certain vibe. And so some of my publishers, I can't go too extreme. I can't kill everybody at the end, for example. They're like, you can't do it. But some publishers you can't. So it depends on what the story is and who the publisher is.
Yeah, I guess I've never I've really supportive editors, and maybe my vibes kind of match with theirs. Like I've never gone too far yet. Like if anything, they kind of push me maybe to go even further, for what it's worth. But like I've never written anything where I've been like, okay, like I need to step back here. Like I've gone too far. Like I think Stephen King did that. I think he said with Pet Sematary. I think that's when he said, like, I've gone too far this time. And if you've read Pet Sematary, you will fully understand why.
The book is
Yeah, I've only had two big instances of that. One of them was I wrote a whole novel and I turned it in about 2.5 years ago, and um, it involved some instances of sexual abuse or child sexual abuse, and it's never seen the light of day, and I don't know if it ever will. But my second book, Indian Burial Ground, revolves around a few mysterious deaths, and originally they were all child deaths. And my editor had me change them. They let me keep one child death, but the other two had to be changed. But I had used that example of Stephen King's Pet Sematary as justification for it. Like, well, it's been done before. Why can't I do it? Why can't I do it too? Obviously, I'm not Stephen King, but yeah, those were the only two real things where I got some pushback and I had to make some
That
changes.
literally just happened to me. In the Neverland book, one of the kids, I killed him. And my editor's like, can you just injure him really badly? You'd upset people. And I was like, all right, fine.
I've also killed kids in my book, and I and I remember talking to my editor about it. I'm like, I don't know if I should do this, and she's like, it's fine. I'm like, okay.
So Jimmy's also a teacher. So this is a great segue. I was wondering, Jimmy, has any experience or story from teaching, a student, a moment, anything ever crept into any of your books before?
Yes. I'm not like, I don't like burn people. I don't like put in things. Ooh, like I'll get back at this person for whatever. But like I do have like characters in my books are teachers, and then there are characters who are in high school. So for like Dead 11, like one of the main characters, Lily, like she's in high school. So being obviously we're all students at some point, but I've always worked in education since I graduated. Like I just kind of go to that, and one of the scenes in 13 Months Haunted is like the library runs like a scary story contest, and it is similar to something that happened to me years and years ago, where I had my students write like a scary story, and then one of my students, he was a middle schooler, wrote something like really scary that was involving like a supernatural experience. And I was reading it and being like, this doesn't sound like fiction. This sounds like you are like writing a journal entry here about something that happened to you. And it really kind of like freaked me out. So, and that whole idea of what if a student wrote something kind of freaky and scary and you're wondering if it was real, that made its way as a plot point into 13 Months Haunted.
Before I ask any other questions, I want to open it up to the audience. Do any of you have any questions for the panelists? Anything that was on your mind that you wanted to ask? Yeah, right here. Your favorite horror character. Favorite horror character. In books and or movies? Doesn't matter? Doesn't matter.
I'm Freddy Krueger. Love him.
Yeah, if we're talking slashers, like killers, I love Michael Myers. I love the Halloween movies. I wish I had a better answer.
Yeah, Michael Myers from the first Halloween movie, ignoring all of the brother, sister, and all the sequel stuff, like just straight up Michael Myers first movie. Or I really like Stu Macher, played by Matthew Lillard from the first Scream. Like those are my two favorite characters.
Yeah, I like Freddy Krueger because it's like you can't outrun him. He's gonna get you somewhere in your dreams. So.
And also from Halloween, Laurie Strode, the final girl. I think she's such a strong character, especially with how they concluded her story arc with the last movie. I really dug that. I feel like we should be giving fiction, or like writing examples, but I'm drawing a blank right now.
I mean, it adds to our writing, right? Yeah.
No Art the Clown references. No Art the Clowns.
Oh yeah, that's a good
Any other questions? Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Radek. How much do you read?
Probably like 100 books a year.
Quite a bit. I read every day. I treat it as part of my job, really. I set aside at least an hour and a half to 2 hours every day just to read.
I read a lot of novellas. They're short. They're like baby books. Okay, so people were like whispering.
Yeah. I try to always have a book on me, like in my car too, so I can grab the book instead of just mindlessly going through my phone, which is like the easiest dopamine hit in the world. So it's like, have the book on me, you know, so I could, because like Nick said, it is a job, and reading helps a lot.
Yeah, reading is so important. It helps you, you know, see how you can improve your own writing because you see what other people are doing and how creative they are and you know the wild things that they come up with. But also helps you come up with ideas because you can play off of other people's ideas. And I think when a writer doesn't read, you can tell. You can tell that they're not pushing themselves, and that is how I push myself. I read, you know, all of the things that are selling right now, all of the things on the bestseller list, all of the things that are getting nominated for awards. Ask myself, why are these things standing out? And I feel like that's how I get stronger as a writer myself.
What are you guys reading right now? Any books
I
that,
don't think
or a book that stood out to you in the past few ones?
I'm actually reading a book that I had been meaning to read for years. It's called The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, and it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm not even halfway through, and it's already blowing my mind.
I'm reading Night Film, and then I'm rereading Donna Tartt's Goldfinch right now too.
I'm reading a book, a book called Nitro, which is about the rise and fall of WCW wrestling in the 1990s. I read a lot of nonfiction, so like that's a really interesting book. I'm also rereading Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. That's in my front seat right now.
Night Film was a really good book. I like Night Film.
Night Film's cool.
Do you enjoy it so far?
Hmm?
Did you say you're reading it or you had read it?
I've read like the first part of Night Film before, and I got sidetracked, and now I'm just rereading it. So it's like a really great like detective novel. And if you want to read the book, there's like all these like articles in it. It's really fun. So yeah.
Very cool. Any other questions? Any other questions? In the center or the far right? Far. Oh yeah, there you go. Right over there. So supernatural fictional stories still having an advantage in dealing with life.
I think so. I think a lot of you know movies and books that deal with supernatural, paranormal things that maybe can't exactly exist. They are symbolic usually of something. They usually have some sort of message. They're trying to communicate something. So it might take a little more analysis or, you know, thinking about, for instance, Sinners, which just got nominated for a ton of Academy Awards. You might just look at it and say, oh, it's a vampire story. But when you break that story down, it's not really about vampires at all. It's about, you know, racism in Jim Crow South and, you know, so many injustices that were done. And, you know, there's so much depth within that film that can easily be missed if you're just looking at the horror aspects and the horror tropes. So yeah, I think most horror stories do have some sort of depth worked into them, weaved into them. I think a lot of horror writers really do put time and effort into that, but it's just up to us to kind of dissect it and figure out what they're really telling us.
Yeah. One of my favorite films is Pan's Labyrinth. It's a fairy tale. It's historical. It also talks about, you know, fascism during, you know, Franco's Spain. And so there's just so many different themes that are being explored. And it's done so beautifully, too.
I have a Pan's Labyrinth sticker on my. There we go. Nice. Any other questions? Yeah, in the middle. Yeah, go ahead. What, on the projector screen? They said it looks like. Yes, of course we did. Of course we did that on purpose. How are we doing on time? We got time for maybe one or two more questions if you have them. Yeah. When did you feel like you made it as a writer? Or do you feel like you've made it as a writer?
I mean, it would be weird to say, like, you know, oh, I've published 2 books. I have 2 more coming out that I feel like I haven't made it yet. Like, because technically, yes. But, like, as far as, like, validation goes, I think the most validated that I ever felt was I feel like I was in the middle of my second book, 13 Months Haunted, and then my publisher signed me to a 2-book deal while I was writing that. And like, before that, usually if you want to become a writer, you kind of have to like write a complete book first and then get an agent, try to sell it. So I was at the point where they're like, Giuliano, will you just write more books now, please? And I didn't have to tell them exactly what I would do yet. It was like that level of trust that's what I felt, oh my gosh, like I'm kind of here, like this is amazing.
I was talking to Josh Mallerman about this because it's scary. It's like a terrifying job because you never know you always have to keep working. And so I feel like even with having multiple book deals, having major publishing deals, I feel even awards, I don't feel like I've made it. I don't feel like that's happened, and I don't even think that would feel like it's gonna happen. And Josh Mallerman told me this, he felt the same thing. He's like, what you do, you just need to keep walking and imagine that there's no bridge, but as you keep stepping forward, the bridge will just kind of appear. And so I think it's just part of, there's this idea that we're gonna hit it and it's gonna be amazing. But I think that's the life of a writer or an artist. You always are just creating.
I think for me, I always feel like I'm still not there yet. I gotta keep working, and I don't know what exactly will make you feel like you are there. But then there are, every now and then little moments where something will happen, and I'll be like, oh, is this really my life? Is this really, where I am right now? Just to give an example, like. I got invited to go to Barnes & Noble Book Festival in New York, and there were tons of other authors there, and I'm sitting on this stage next to, writers who have sold millions of copies of books, and I'm like, how am I in this mix? So it's just like little weird things like that.
You belong there.
But you don't feel like you do. But yeah, so it's just a weird thing. It's a weird life sometimes.
Great. We only have about 1 minute left, so let's give a round of applause for the panel, please. If you are interested in talking to them, feel free to come on up, get a picture. If you're interested in buying their books, they're out in the hallway. They'll sign them for you. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
So if you want bookmarks, I got free bookmarks.
Nick Medina has bookmarks.